All you need is love. All I want to do this morning in my affirmative case is to change how you look at life. Which is to say, all I want to do this morning is change your life. Here is my statement of the case. Not only is love all you need, when you are consumed by so-called needs that you presume to be greater, you stand to lose what matters most in life. So I want to say that again. The first part is the not only, all you need is love. But not only that, when you think there's something more important, when there's something you think is a need, and you are consumed by that need, you stand to lose what matters most in life. So my first contention in my case is that whatever you think of my answer, the issue poses life's most crucial question, which you could put as, what do we really need in life, or what matters most in life? What is the highest value? What should we measure the aspirations of our lives by? What is it that will make the difference between whether we've lived fully or in vain? Those are not trivial questions. Therefore, this debate should not stoop to sophistry, technical tricks, or debate wizardry. It's philosophy, it's psychology, it's spirituality, it's everything that matters. Have I built things up enough to let you down? Or? All right. What do we really need? The rebuttal that I will give here to my own position is not going to be one that's structured on and off all the way through. I think that you all have grown up with the rebuttal of my position in your ears most of the time. I think you've grown up with the voices that say, what about money? What about rent? What about this? All the different things that the naysayers will say we miss out on if we focus too much on love in a naive, idealistic way. So this morning, instead of structuring things with a back and forth, you know the debate, or at least you're very familiar with the dismissal of all you need is love. What I think I need to do, after perhaps years of seeing those aspirations and ideals beaten down, is to wake them back up. So that's what I'm about this morning. It is a one-sided presentation, but it'll incorporate the other side you've already got going between your ears. First, before I go into any of the other substance, I want to recall a few points of debate fairness, even though really what I'm doing is an outline of a debate rather than a debate. First, you cannot, in opposition to what I'm saying, make assumptions or arguments that render my case impossible or absurd. So you can't define love in such a way that it's going to leave out all the things without which we couldn't live at all. Along with that, you can't make me defend a caricature, a poor version, what logicians call a straw man version of that which I'm defending and exalting. You can't, for instance, reduce it to, well, when people speak of love in that sense, they usually mean, or even reduce it to what John Lennon himself, or the many hippies who took that up, might have meant. In other words, I have to be free to define and articulate that love which is all you need, which is part of what I take to be my responsibility here. Pardon my voice, I don't know where this, I turned Flemish all of a sudden. So the constraint on me is that whatever I articulate as the love that is all you need has to be recognizable as love. It can't be that I'm just substituting something else in place of love in order to defend it. In sum, there must be room for both sides of the debate to build a case for your consideration. As for my rebuttals, as I said, I'll show that the negative case that we've heard all our lives, mine anyway, the negative case only appears to be convincing because in truth, the dismissal of my position, the naysayer's point of view, is based on misconceptions and unfounded assumptions. Contention number 2. The naysayers misunderstand what love is. It may involve any number of things, but love itself is not passion or lust. It's not a feeling that sweeps you off your feet as if you couldn't help it and moves everything that happens after that. It's not, in its essence, a feeling at all. Bell Hook's recent bestseller, whose title I have written down on another page, All About Love, with her characteristic lowercase initials. Bell Hooks argues that when we take love to be a feeling, an emotion, we're confusing love as a human quality that might endure with what Freud called cathexis, a mere physiological, psychologically driven fusion of powerful emotions in us with the object being another person, and taking that to mean that's what love is. Bell Hooks argues painfully through recalling her life and other people she's known well and the stories of so many, recalls painfully what the consequences are when we are carried away by that assumption that love is a feeling, when we are carried away with the assumption that it is not something we choose and intend and continue to have a choice over, but is something like a current that carries us along. So I won't go into more detail about what Bell Hooks does with that. If you're interested, you might want to read their book. What I will say is that in shaping my own understanding of love, for the purposes of what I'm doing today, I was influenced by what Bell Hooks is doing and how she draws on the work of Eric Fromm and John Bradshaw in articulating those points. So one of the ways we can understand that love is not just this and not just that is that centuries ago the Greek language already had at least 3 distinct words for dimensions of love. Eros would be the Cupid love of Valentine's Day. It would be how I like to spend my Valentine's nights, although this year it was more a matter of philia with that P-H-I-L that starts off philosophy, that is friend or family love. So my big Valentine this year was to my granddaughter, and she appreciated how it opened. Roses are red, violets are not. Pop loves you a whole lot. So that was, I got into that this year. That was nice. That's a different type of love from the bow and arrow. Let me get a reservation for dinner at just the right place where, And then there's agape, which is particularly taken up with importance out of the Greek by Christians, and also reflects the ideals of compassion and bodhicitta that you find in Buddhism, as well as many other major spiritual traditions. So 3 different prominent dimensions of love. I could, in debate terms, try to define all 3, look for a common thread, but I don't want to do that because I want to submit that as we live it, love doesn't begin from categories, it begins from my experience, my heart, my connection with others. So I don't want to predefine varieties of something that might be entirely different among Unitarian Universalist renegades. So instead, let me note that the naysayers could be just as dismissive of Jesus or Buddha as of the hippies. Would that be a coincidence? Before the lads from Liverpool recorded All You Need Is Love, there was another quartet, a gospel quartet, that made heavy use of that sentiment. Have many of you have heard Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John? Yeah, in those Gospels, there's a whole bunch of stuff about love being what you need. So, mirror in the sky, what is love? Here is the definition that I formulated for the purpose of what I want to defend in this debate as the love that is all you need. In love, I open my authentic self to another or others and share deeply with them by giving and receiving mutual respect and affection through my caring acts and faithful commitments. I'm going to say that again, but what I tried to do was take what it feels like, as in my heart is opening up kind of thing, the essential component of relationship, which can be multiple. I had a Valentine for my other granddaughter too, a little different first. And then along with that you are what you do. So don't tell me you love me if you're beating me up. Again, in love, I open my authentic self to another or others and share deeply with them by giving and receiving mutual respect and affection through my caring acts and faithful commitments. I had a romantic relationship not too long ago where I became convinced that the big issue that was keeping that from being able to work was that my partner had difficulty receiving love. That this person was not stingy with herself, but that there were so many things wrapped into who she was as a person and what she had to do and felt compelled about in her daily life, that there was not room for her to be in the kind of relationship that I considered mutually sustaining and what you would need to have that go on. So that's why I include the receiving as well as the giving. I am wary of anything that construes an important value to me as a sacrifice. So yes, for my family, I did give up a kidney for my brother who was diabetic and who needed that along with a pancreas from a cadaver. But I don't want to construe acts of that kind as a sacrifice, because it was a choice that I made to enrich his life in light of the values that were most important to me, and also in terms of how I would have felt if I didn't do it and it felt to somebody else. I didn't want to be that. And so the way I construed that, instead of saying sacrifice, instead of a giving that was taken away from me, is, isn't it great to be the brother who's got the extra kidney instead of the brother who needed one? So that's a different way of looking at it. Anyway, I'm rambling on a little bit, but the definition that I've just constructed is drawn out of the thinking of bell hooks and what she quotes from those others. The common thread for me in all love is that I deeply open myself to others. I risk vulnerability. There is no true love when anyone insists on complete control, is there? We've all either found that out or know better than going there in the first place. The best way to get at what that means, I think, is to contrast self-love with selfishness. There was a time probably when we thought of self-love as an inappropriate thing, and a lot of people were grown up to continue believing that all their lives. But psychologists tell us we need self-love. In fact, bell hooks goes on to say, self-love is the foundation of our loving practice. Without it, our other efforts to love fail. And so we might think of self-love as something very close to self-esteem, but I think there is an affection for oneself in self-love. That, anyway, I won't try to do a whole phenomenology of it, but I do want to contrast it with selfishness in this way. In self-love, I am an open self. I'm responsive to multiple perspectives within me. Some of them may have been what we might call introjected, absorbed in from family and other social sources, and they live in my head. But the me that is a self-loving self, whatever voices make up that self and go into my inner ears, I am responsive to that quality of difference, of multiple perspectives, so that I am not just locked into the me that we think of as ego. Whereas in selfishness, that's exactly what's going on. We call someone selfish when they're stingy about themselves going out. So I think how that helps clarify that love is openness, even if it's just my love of me, that's sort of what's at the very heart of it. When Hooks observes that self-love is the foundation of our loving practice, and without it our other efforts to love fail, that idea of success or failure gets to something really crucial. Debate. And remember what the stakes are, really. It's nothing less than our success or failure in life, viewed in a true rather than a superficial and from the outside point of view. The issue is philosophical, but it's in psychology that we find the evidence. What makes for human flourishing? What are the conditions and preconditions for the good life as we might measure it in terms of our full psychological health? Yes, we need air. Yes, we need water. Yes, we need shelter. We need all those crucial elements that the naysayers say all you need is love might leave out. In fact, all of those are elements that Abraham Maslow puts at the very base of his hierarchy of needs. He says, without those things, you can't go anywhere. You're not anybody. Therefore, by that fairness principle, if you give me the conditions for what it is that I'm defending, then all of those things in that first level hierarchy of physical and basic psychological security have to be included in what love is, because without them you cannot have an adequate love. Yes, those are what's needed, but they are not up for debate. There really isn't a debate about whether we should be secure or have shelter or whatever else. So psychologists tell us that there are more subtle preconditions for a decent human life, some of which have only recently been appreciated. Let's focus on love, on what makes relationship possible. Bessel van der Kolk, who is perhaps the preeminent authority on trauma and resiliency, a professor, therapist, writer, activist, all the things you would want, as well as someone who's a mensch and can explain it to you in a book. He sums it up this way. If you lack a deep memory of feeling loved and safe, the receptors in the brain that respond to human kindness may simply fail to develop. The capacity to give or receive love is rooted in a history of having been loved and felt that. Authors point out in various ways that the biggest breakdown between parents and children, when the children don't come out of that well in their psychological development, is mutuality. The very thing I think is definitionally essential to love in a mature and adequate sense. It goes in both directions. It's not just, I'm the parent, you're the kid, I'm taking care of you, do this. It's for your own good. Yeah, I'm spanking you with a pretty hard belt, but I'm doing what's good for you. That is not something that enters deeply into the memory as I was profoundly loved. Right? So this is really important. if the question is what's most important in life, if the contention is that all you need is love, if love requires things without which we couldn't even have a real love at all, then we need to be really attentive to what those preconditions are, don't we? So for generations, those of us who have inclined to the progressive side of the political spectrum have paid a lot of attention to measures of well-being that are material. But I believe what we haven't done well enough, any of us, regardless of political stripe, is to think deeply about those psychological conditions that are also related to the conditions of our lives and into which we are born. But more on that in a minute. The argument would be to say that all you need is love is to say that this must be love that's cultivated over, if not a full life, at least a good stretch of the first part of it. It can't be regarded as an instantaneous thing, because without what led up to that moment, there would be no capacity for it at all. I've read deeply into this stuff on trauma, and it's just shocking how messed up neurological systems become with multiple adverse childhood events that are substantial and sustained. It makes you a wrongly built person. And I don't want to say that because some of you might have experienced abuse or something else that you are a badly built person. What I want to say is there are protective factors, there are people who help us through, there are all kinds of ways. But many of us know that we're compromised. Or we know to a degree, this is really holding me back some. And so I think the field of psychology, the field of human self-understanding will be transformed the more attention we pay to the people who really deal well in clinical terms with the traumas that we have sustained. So when I say all you need is love, when I point to that which is making love possible in our psychological health, much of that relies on the expertise of people whose job is to care, right? As opposed to whose job is to sort out a workforce for those who want to decide which workers will have which attributes or something like that. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I worked for Social Security. Never mind, I didn't really. So the most conspicuous failures are those, but that brings me to contention number 3, I think it is. Without sustained and effective love, you won't be fully human. Maybe major therapeutic interventions will fix you enough to get by, maybe not. But that's part of what's required. The argument goes even further. The naysayers continue to point a nasty picture of human nature, so-called human nature, that would dismiss my case as deluded idealism. It may be the saying that life is nasty, brutish, and short. It may be that aggression and selfishness are intrinsic to human nature, that we will never overcome them. There are a lot of keys that song is sung in, if I may. But I say, and you could call this my next contention, is at 4, there wouldn't be any humans, any Homo sapiens at all, if not for the love that I'm defending. Now, you might argue that a mother is going to take care of her baby because the hormones are strong, blah, 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 blah. But when humans started having babies, they have calculated that the calories that were required for that baby to grow to maturity were more than the mother could do. What were required were what are technically called alloparents, but what I call grandmas and nanas, and because they're the ones that were the first ones out and the last ones back in the evening. It was mama's mama that was the person who was bringing in that extra stuff to make it work. And there were not hormones going on in that person. This was not something that was physiologically driven. This was because in order for us to have women deliver babies that were going to grow heads big enough to be really interesting Homo sapiens, they couldn't get them through the birth canal. They couldn't wait that long, and it just would take too long to grow the birth canals that big. So we were born helpless and have been ever since we started. Our characteristic, to me, is first of all our vulnerability. We're not born into the world as individuals who are autonomous, X, Y, Z. That's part of what we're raised to become. We start out utterly helpless and dependent. Therefore, what is required for there to be human beings at all? What is required is that love that isn't only the love of a mother for her baby, it's a love that becomes, in a social context, what makes human society and human beings ourselves even possible. Now that's a really strong argument for love being necessary. It must be intrinsic to human nature, or there wouldn't be human beings. So perhaps, and I would even say this is my contention number 6, I think we're up to. Left out contention number 5 is that this kind of love must be intrinsic to human beings, or there wouldn't be human beings. Contention number 6 then, when we consider the debate, all you need is love, affirmative and negative, perhaps it is miscast when we place it as an individual issue. Perhaps it's not, first of all, individuals whose needs and priorities stand out. Perhaps, first of all, it's that matrix of society within which we're born, within which we elevate certain priorities and suppress others. We activate certain things and call them needs, whereas other things can be mere desires, privileges, or youthful delusions in some cases. I want to suggest, I even want to contend, that the highest values we take to matter in life, we may individually decide those things, but the question of what we need may first of all not be a question of what you or what I need, but of what we need. So I'm not going to go too far down that road this morning, but I want you to be aware that this opens into that in a very powerful way. In fact, Bell Hooks calls a love ethic the kind of overall constellation of values, attitudes, and commitments that someone with this point of view that I'm upholding and uplifting might take. A love ethic pretty well characterizes much of the most avid listenership of the song, All You Need Is Love. But however much we've shown that you need love, have we shown that love is all you need? It's a necessary condition, but is it sufficient? And we have to come back to that before we conclude. As I said before, we can't really be quibbling about it in a sophistic way. We can't say, oh, well, you need this and you need this. What does the word need mean? Need doesn't mean, for instance, some people believe that anything's better with bacon on it. So if you say, all you need is blah, 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 blah. Ah, you forgot to add the bacon. If you add the bacon, it's well, it may be even better, but it's harder to argue that you need bacon, and without it, you will blah, blah, blah. Sorry, all you useless vegans. So when we're talking about need, we're talking about what is indispensable. We're talking about what is irreplaceable. We're talking about that which you cannot do without, right? So if we've shown it to be necessary, well, that means you can't do without it. But then there's the second question, is all you need love? Is that enough? What about those other material factors? What about that first level of Maslow's hierarchy? And I want to say, the love that I'm saying is all you need is a love that cares in a reflective, mutual way for the beloved. So, do I care whether my beloved has enough to eat? Do I care whether my beloved has any financial security? I'm not saying that love entails that you'll have all that good stuff. I'm just saying a person who is genuinely in love in the way that I'm upholding it would be a person most likely to attend to the things that were real needs. Now, might not be the Lexus. It might not be, this or that brand of whatever. But the real needs, core needs, I think are the things that I would look out for. Let me give you an example that's, again, from that kind of family rather than romantic domain. For a number of years after I had basically quit smoking, I'd smoke a few a day, 4 or 5 cigarettes a day, 6 something. My daughter couldn't stand it. I said, it's no big deal. I could quit any time. It's like, well, then quit. The reason I was able to quit, the reason I did quit, is because it upset my daughter. And I didn't want to be upsetting my daughter, so if I thought I don't have to do that, well, then why upset my daughter? The value I placed on my daughter's peace of mind was higher than whatever value that rush from, And so that's an example of something that even in the domain of health, I looked out for my own health, not for my sake, first of all, but was motivated by my daughter's concern for my health. I believe that when we think of how effective loving actually unfolds in human lives, we can put back most of what people want to take away when they say that all you need is love is unrealistic and idealistic. It isn't those things. It's just something that provokes us to think it through carefully and to try to understand the difference between real, authentic love and a semblance of it that may feel good in the moment, which many people of that generation were prone to in many ways. So I want that to contend that in love, I'm at least as likely to have the things that really matter from that first domain of security. Now, there's another word we haven't defined besides is, and I don't want to get mystical on you. You. All you need is love. Now, usually in a debate, we would parse that out as one. You as in anyone. But I'm not going to do that. I'm an existentialist. I'm talking to you, not her. I'm talking to you, not her. Each of you is the jury that matters to me this morning. And so the question is not, is all somebody else needs, is all anybody. The question is, what do you need in life? And so all you need is love doesn't necessarily mean anyone, anywhere. The point is, that's all you need. And I point my finger at myself as well. So here's my question to you this morning to end with. Is there anything more important than love, as I've defined it? Is there anything you would trade away love in order to get? Not mentioned among the greatest philosophers, the Doobie Brothers nailed it. Especially the Richie Havens version, but without love, where would you be now? I wouldn't. But argument from subtraction. Life, if there were a devil going to take away everything in your life that meets Mark's definition of love, but you're not going to miss it because I'm going to replace your desires with the desires for the things that you can choose for me before I hypnotize you. What do you want to trade all that love for? You tell me, it's yours. And then after we've completed the switcheroo, I will hypnotize you into a state where that's what you really want. So you won't miss what's gone once it's gone. That's part of the deal. Isn't that nice? Very considerate. Of course it is. Mephistopheles is a playful cat. So my question to you is then, is there anything you would trade away love in order to get? Take anything you think you need, take everything you think you need, take love away from that, and what have you got left? If you would not make that trade, if you would not give up love, take that same thought in a positive direction with addition instead of subtraction. How much love can you add to your life? How much of what you could do with more love? How much more might you open or extend or enrich your life through those other connections that are only partly cultivated thus far? How much love could you add to the world, to your world? Would your life be even better the more it's guided by love? I end with a closing line of one of my very favorite Unitarian Universalist hymns. I have to pause a moment. This one's real nice. Sorry. I don't know why that just touched me. We cease to give. We cease to live. Such is the law of love. Thank you.